to this live chat all about pebbles. I wanted to call them circles because that seems a little bit less intimidating for some quilters, but we'll stick with the pebbles term. I'm so excited that you're hanging out with me today. I really come to look forward to these chats on Thursday, and I really do enjoy logging in about half an hour early and answering questions with you guys. Hold on, I gotta turn off my sound so that you don't hear me on the reverb. Anyway, I love seeing everybody's questions. I love writing them down. So I've got a list of questions, and if it's a quick question, I'll answer it and type it out real quick. If it's a longer one, I definitely just address it during the live chat. So this week we did pebbles, and we kind of talked about regular pebbles and a couple variations, and then combining them with other designs. And I knew when I started this challenge that that was going to be a tricky one, because some people just don't love them. And if you don't love pebbles, that's fine, no worries. But if you do love pebbles, I think you're really going to like the tutorial that we're working on. So what I'm going to do is show some pictures and kind of talk through some tips that maybe didn't make it in there. And I also want to show you examples on actual quilts. I know I've said this before, but it's one thing to know how to quilt a design. It's a totally different thing to know how and where you should use it, or suggestions for it. To kind of help with that ever-present question, how should I quilt it? So first, let's go to the slideshow, and then I'll answer your questions. So let's talk about machine quilting with pebbles. Now, the thing about pebbles is it's a perfect filler because it's static. There's no movement to it. There's no, direction. It's just nice and flat, and it squishes an area down, so whatever it's around will pop up. So it's kind of like the best quilting wingman, right? It's going to help show off whatever you put it around. And it's such a basic shape, right? In theory, most of us know how to draw something that's close to a circle, but like I said in the video, there has never been a design that has been so basic yet frustrated so many quilters, because it's not the first one that's difficult, it's the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth ones that give you trouble. So I'm hoping to kind of elaborate on some of the tips I gave in the video and kind of show you that it's not too bad. All right, so first of all, here's a sample that we worked on. I started with the regular pebbles, and you know what's so funny is I tell quilters all the time, don't apologize for your quilting, don't point out your mistakes, but it's a tendency that we all have. I know that because even as I was quilting and I'm looking at that bright pink thread, I was thinking, oh, I want to say so badly, like, they would look better if the thread matched, but the trick is to remember that it's fine, don't point out your mistakes. But just know, if you're gonna quilt pebbles, contrasting thread is really great for seeing what you're doing, not great for seeing all the imperfections. So we kind of talked about the pebbles design, and then we moved into the Loopy Meander. And I kind of threw this in there for those of you that aren't comfortable with machine quilting or don't want to take the time that it takes to do pebbles. A Loopy Meander is going to give you a really similar texture, and it's going to be the next best thing. So you can definitely do that to kind of ease your way into it. And what I love about quilting is you don't have to start out with the most complicated design. You can definitely work up to it. So starting out with just a wiggly line, and then maybe throwing in a loop, and then after a couple times or maybe a couple sips of wine, you throw in a couple of loops and you kind of build up to it. So I kind of wanted to take a moment during the tutorial and show you what that looks like, right? This is how we kind of build off of it, and we get better at one thing and we kind of keep building and building. And so two different options for those of you that are quilting along with me. So here's a closer up version of the Loopy Meander. And I always think it's so important that you fill in a defined area, because not only do you get the experience of dealing with corners, you get to see the design with the whole thing quilted. You cannot look at it with just one piece quilted and judge it. You have to see the whole thing. And this example is one of my favorites because quilted in the sample is the word oops. So the idea is if you make a mistake, you make it oopsie, you just put more mistakes around it until it goes away. And I know that that's really, really hard for a lot of quilters to believe me on that. But if you just keep going, keep filling around it, eventually it all just kind of blends into each other, especially if you're using a blending thread color. Here, I have a contrasting thread color. I told you that the oops is in there, so you're probably gonna see it. Hopefully, I hope my face isn't covering it up. Oh, just barely, you can see it. It's right under my arm, right over here, but just barely. So the idea is you keep going, you keep filling it in, and it all looks great. So you have to do that. And that is specifically for Joe, who said, how can I get over my FOMO, my fear of messing up? Well, there's always going to be that fear that you're going to mess up, but you have to kind of embrace it and just keep going and realizing when you're done, even if the quilting isn't perfect, you still have a finished quilt, and that's always the best deal. I said courage or wine also helps, but getting over the fear of messing up just is jumping into it, leaning into it, and realizing it's going to be fine. I promise. All right, and then here's a more traditional example of the pebbles with the matching thread color, with that pretty texture. Again, this is probably not a design I'm going to put over a whole quilt. It's going to not only be tedious, but it's going to be so repetitive that it's just going to have that all over texture. You're not going to see a whole lot. You're just going to have pebbles. So, but this was an area I was filling in. And what I love about my samples is sometimes when I'm traveling or doing classes in person, sometimes people will say things like, oh, I love that you leave your mistakes in so that we can see them. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, that's my A game. That's the good piece I took a picture of. So for those of you that asked about traveling with accuracy, and that was Nan asked that as well, how do you quilt the circle and you quilt on top of it the next time and get it perfect each time? I don't know. I'll let you know when I get to that point. I don't think it's possible. I think we get close and we move on, and we know that the unquilted area is going to really pop out. And we know when we step back, it's all going to blend together. And we know that you're not going to point out your mistakes to other people, right? Right. So again, it's a great texture to fill in around other things or to create different variations. Now, this is kind of my showing off example, but this is a quilt from way back in the day that I did for Tula Pink. It was her Parisville panel, so it was a huge panel, and I wanted the letters to really pop out. Well, what I knew what I needed to do was pebbles and really small, and that contrast is going to make it pop out. But if you look at the filler, I didn't do pebbles over that whole background. I quilted pebbles around the thing I wanted to show off, and then I transitioned quickly to swirls because those are quicker. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but when we talk about switch or combining designs, you can use it as a way to transition out of the pebbles. So here, the pebbles are all quilted real close next to the letters, and then I throw in some swirls and move on directly to the swirls. So you don't have to put pebbles over the whole area. You can switch to something else and still get that same effect that you're going for, which is awesome. Now let's talk about troubleshooting. So common issues with quilting the pebbles design. And this comes from years of teaching, and I like to think of the questions that people ask when I'm teaching. So if you get something like this, right? So I'm quilting my circles and I'm going on to my next one. Well, what's happening here is I'm not changing direction, right? So I talked about that, kind of went into a little detail in the video, but I'm going to go clockwise and counterclockwise, or anti-clockwise, however you say it. But it's that change of direction that gives it that kind of twist and lets them stick together, kind of like a figure eight. Now, every quilter is different and everybody has different things that are helpful to them. I think of it as quilting my circle and then quilting my next one that goes away from it. Like it's kind of like I'm going to go away. Some people think of figure eights, right? So here's my 8 and I'll add another part to my 8. Whatever you have to think about, just use that as a clue to help you change direction. So if you have to say clockwise, counterclockwise, or left and right, that will help you make sure they stick together. Now, if this is what you do, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's consistent, that's fine. So if this is just to help if you want it to look more like a traditional pebble. If you don't want it to look like a traditional pebble, then you do you, and it's going to be fine. All right, so then the second one more commonly is, the first one's more common with brand new quilters, and the second one kind of comes after we're getting the hang of it, where you get a thread buildup in the center. And so what's happening here is I'm not traveling. Right, so I'm just quilting, I'm going from one to the next, making my circles, and they're going to go into a row. That's okay, it's not the end of the world, but what happens is now we have a noticeable direction, and that's going to draw attention to that, especially with that thread buildup in the center. In general, when I'm quilting pebbles, I don't want to see a pattern because I just want that overall texture, which means I want it to look random and I want them all to blend in with each other. So you're going to have to travel to achieve that. And I get it, it's one more thing to think about, it's another thing to like have on your mind, but you don't have to travel every pebble. Travel every third pebble or something just to change up the direction a bit and then continue on. And that was a question that came up a lot. The traveling with accuracy and how do you know when to travel or where to travel? And I'll answer those a little bit more when we're full screen. But just know that traveling is what's going to help you go in all different directions. And what you have to do, and it's hard, you have to give up this notion that's going to be perfect. You're just going to have to get it kind of close and trust that as you keep filling it in, it's going to look fine. Okay, I promise. All right, so then we talked about changing up the size of our pebbles. Now, what's so funny about this is if you're familiar with quilting a traditional pebbles filler, you might find this variation a little difficult because you've already kind of trained yourself to make them all the same size. I know that was the case for me. I learned regular pebbles, and then to switch up the sizes, sometimes I really have to like stop and kind of think through what I'm going to do. But if you're newer to quilting, you might find this variation easier than the regular pebbles. You might be thinking, heck, I've already been making them different sizes. I'm like way ahead of the curve here, and you are right. But making them or quilting them in different sizes is going to accomplish a couple different things. It's going to make it go faster, which is nice. It's going to give you a softer texture. So for a baby quilt or something like that. And it's just a great way to practice the design without worrying about keeping it all the same size. So as you're learning a design, if you're struggling with a certain part and you're like, oh, I hate the pebbles because I can't keep them all the same size, well then let that go. Switch it out with something else and see if that helps you get comfortable with it. But the trick with quilting them different sizes, and I did say this in the video, you want to make sure it looks intentional. So enough difference between the sizes. You don't want it to look like you're trying to make it the same size and not. So definitely enough variation between the sizes. And I use the reference of coins because that's what I think of. I think of, you know, quarters, dimes, nickels, just because they're different in size and I have a visual representation in my head of that. Or you can keep a piece of paper right next to you and maybe draw out a couple different sizes and give yourself a rhythm to follow that you can change it up. So the biggest difficulty with this one is that sometimes you'll be traveling around larger circles, which is a little bit more difficult than traveling around smaller circles. But on the flip side, since we have those bigger circles, gaps won't be as noticeable. So it's kind of a trade-off there. Speaking of gaps, when you're quilting the traditional design, that was one thing I talked about. You want to fill in any gaps. And if I have a space in between the pebbles that's the size of a pebble or smaller, I'll leave it. But if it's bigger than a pebble and it seems to stick out, I'll go back and fill it in. Again, that's just my rule that I follow. You can definitely do whatever you want to do. But with this, since I have some bigger pebbles, that means that gaps won't be as noticeable since I have those bigger areas. This is also not necessarily designed that I would put in such small areas. It just happened to work itself out for this challenge, and I didn't want to, you know, put a huge area for you to pebble in. That's not going to be fun, so I try to keep it smaller and also show you how to combine it with designs, but definitely a different variation just for a different look. And this will be a little bit more of a quilted sample with a thread color matching. Again, check out those travel lines. They're not perfect, but it's fine because when you're not looking at it this close, you just see that pretty texture. So fun sample with that. And another close-up of the contrasting thread. So again, contrasting thread is not your friend in general when you're quilting pebbles. But I want to show you a couple quilts where I'd use this example. So this was a quilt that I made, gosh, it's probably been about 8 years ago. And it's a whole cloth actually, and it's painted. No, it's not a whole cloth. Those rectangles are pieced in, but the center is all one piece, and it was quilted and painted. Well, I wanted to do pebbles, but I didn't want to do like teeny tiny pebbles. I already told you, I get very bored very easily of doing any design, but especially pebbles, because you have to really kind of like be paying attention. So here I changed up the size and varied them. They're bigger in general than the traditional pebbles, and it just made it go a lot faster. Because I knew that if I have this giant word, inspire, painted in the center of the quilt, it's going to stand out either way. If I did smaller pebbles, it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. So that just saved me a little bit of time doing the different sizes. But I did love the circly kind of look compared to the brickwork on the background. So that's what I kind of did. Now, when we talk about changing up the scale or the size of our designs, one thing I didn't talk about was being intentional with it. And this particular quilt in the background, I quilted pebbles, but the size of them changes from smaller to bigger as I work my way down the quilt. Well, this is going to do a couple different things. I think it kind of, you know, I wanted the idea that it's smaller at the top and bigger at the bottom, but it's also quicker than quilting those small pebbles over the whole quilt. I could have done those same size small pebbles in all that background, and it would look fine, but it would take a long time for not a lot of reward. So changing up the size was actually quicker for me because I could just get those bigger ones going down there, and then also adds a little bit of interest without taking away from the main element, the piecing of the quilt. So again, changing up the size, you can be intentional with the placement. You can, you know, quilt them really small around something and make them bigger as you go away, or, you know, smaller at the top and bigger at the bottom, however you want to do it. And I'm not over on the chat yet to read, but usually the question that comes when I show this quilt in a slideshow is, what about puckering or waviness? If I have dense pebbles over here and big ones, like how's that gonna affect it? And I always say I don't do show quilting, so don't do what I suggest and expect to win a ribbon at a show, but I haven't noticed any problems with it. And I'm only talking like maybe 2 inches to a half of an inch. You know, I'm not talking like big unquilted areas. So you can kind of wrestle with that and decide how you feel about it, but I had a lot of fun doing that. So when you're quilting them different sizes, we're trying to keep them different enough, right? We want there to be enough difference, but I'm also going to quilt the bigger ones first and then fill in with the smaller ones. So those smaller ones are going to kind of act like the little bit of filler, or kind of, they're easier to work in that way. This will keep you from getting a big group of small pebbles, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but I want them to be kind of mixed into each other. And it just so happens that this is a tiptoe into combining designs, right? So if we'll talk about this in a second, but combining designs, I quilt the bigger things first and then put pebbles in the smaller areas. This was included so that you can kind of transition into that, if that is helpful. All right, so then we talked about combining designs. This, guys, this is my favorite thing to do. Although now I realize I say that about every design. As I'm editing my videos, I'm like, oh, I say this one's my favorite, and this one's my favorite. But they're kind of like my children. I love the one I'm with, right? Whoever I'm with is my favorite. But combining designs does a number of things. First, I can use a design that I'm not comfortable with and combine it with a design that I am comfortable with so that I'm not freaking out the whole time, right? So if you're like, I don't know about pebbles, but I do like flowers, I do like leaves, it just allows you to sprinkle in a few here and there and kind of get comfortable with it before you fill in a whole area with this design. Plus, it's just a lot of fun, just so much fun. And so I just use designs we've already learned through this challenge. So the flower, the leaf, and the pebble, but man, pebbles work with everything. They're just friendly little guys. They get along with everybody. And so when we're talking through it, basically the idea is the things that take longer to develop or that are bigger go first. So the flower is not necessarily has to be bigger, but it does take more time to develop. It's not like quilting a circle. And then leaves too, with our echoing. And then I'm going to use those pebbles to fill in the gaps. So that's the hardest thing for quilters, newer quilters, to kind of wrap their head around. Sometimes they're like, how do you combine designs? And I'm thinking, well, you just combine them, but you have to work like a blob. And I know I use that analogy in the video, but it's so true, even if it isn't a pretty visual picture, but it's like a blob, right? So I don't want to leave any gaps. I want to have everything filled in before I move on. So that means that I'm just kind of building off this area, and I can use echoing to maneuver my way around, I could use traveling, or I can add more pebbles to get where I need to go. So the hardest part is that you're not going to know exactly what it's going to look like when you start. So you're starting and you're like, I have an idea of what it's going to kind of look like, but I'm not 100% sure. You're going to have to trust that it's going to be okay. And sometimes that's difficult for some quilters to get over, but I promise you it will be okay. And if you quilt a couple of these and you're like, forget it, I don't like pebbles, I don't know what Angela's smoking, that's not cool, just leave them out, just stop doing it. So there's no like ratio that you have to worry about or anything like that. We're just kind of having fun with it. Using a matching thread color will definitely help this, keep this from overwhelming your quilt top when you're using this on a quilt. And again, trying to keep everything the same size is what will keep it nice and consistent. Now you can totally throw that out and be like, I want the flowers to show up more than the rest. Then you are going to quilt the flowers bigger with their lines further apart, or with leaves or whatever. So you can change that if you want, but if you want it to be nice and consistent, we're going to keep it the same size. Or we can put the pebbles inside the leaves. I had to throw this in here, guys, because I love this idea, because it can really draw attention around an area, and I'll show you what this looks like on an actual quilt. But the main idea is I'm still combining designs, I'm just being a little bit more intentional with their placement. And this particular effect or design isn't going to be something I'm going to do on every quilt or over the whole quilt. This is definitely one of those like enhancer designs. Like it's one of those like ones I pull out when I want to like show off or want it to show off an area or draw attention to something. So to use makeup as an analogy, that would be like my glitter eyeliner, right? I'm not going to wear that all the places, but definitely when I want to show something off. So what we're doing is we're combining it with leaves. We're making our bigger leaf shape. We want to make sure that it's big enough that we can fill it in, and then we're going to echo it so that it's separated from the rest of the filler. Because if I'm taking the time to put pebbles in the shape, I want to be sure that it's noticeable. Like I want to make sure it stands out. So then I'm going to echo it and then continue on. The good news is you don't have to add pebbles inside every leaf. You're going to still get the same effect, even if you leave out a couple. or you can use ones that are going in a particular direction that you want to show off. Now I'm going to pause real quick because in the sample you can see along the side there's like this densely quilted section of pebbles, and this is a part of the tutorial I cut out because it was getting pretty long. If you really want the quilting to show up or you want to really add some definition, you can travel around each of those pebbles a couple times before moving on. And this is very much like those thready leaves that we did, you know, the echoed leaves that we worked on in week 2. So this though is going to take even longer, and it's really going to make those circles pop. So you have to be careful when you use that, especially you don't want to do a contrasting thread. But this is definitely more, I think, of a show quilting technique. But if you have time and tons of thread and you want to do it, you definitely can. This actually helps too if you've done some traveling and it's not great. You just keep traveling until eventually it looks good and you move on. So that's why that section is like that. So first rule, doesn't matter what shape we would quilt our leaf, if you remember that. When I draw it out, it looks nice and symmetrical, but when I'm quilting it, it tends to be a little bit different. That doesn't matter. But definitely save yourself the headache and make it a little bit bigger. I mean, a couple of inches, because you don't want to try quilting these pebbles in a really tiny space. I like to have a little bit of room to kind of get into the flow of it. And then the second thing you have to think about, which isn't difficult, but I want to fill in that area and come back. Now, this kind of is getting into efficient quilting territory, but the idea is I want to know where I'm going and where I need to end up. And in this particular example, I need to fill in that whole thing and come back, and that's usually the trickier one. So to accomplish this, I work up one side and then fill my way back. So that's kind of how I work it out. Although I know that if I filled it in and I didn't end up where I wanted to, I could just use traveling to get where I need to go, which is what's great about this design. You may hate the traveling, but there's times it comes in handy because you're like, ooh, I don't have to break thread. I can just zip on over there and get to the point. And again, you're going to echo it. We want to separate it. We want to show this off. If I just did a bunch of these without echoing, it would look like pebbles, which is fine, but again, I want this to be an element and kind of show up. And again, not every single one needs the pebbles. You can pick and choose, maybe just have a couple sprinkled in here or there, or have them go in a direction. Again, that's up to you and the effect you're going for. Now, this is an example I found in my photos, and this comes up because there was a question about eyelashing. So this is going to talk about eyelashing and then also a different effect of it. So in this particular example, the pebbles are a little bit bigger. They're not as dense compared to the leaves, so it's a little bit less of a emphasis, so it's not going to kind of stand out quite as much. It's using darker thread, so it's really showing up because it's for a sample, and so wanted it to really show up. But it kind of shows you that it doesn't have to be over the top. You can do bigger pebbles or different fillers. So even just like a meandering line is going to give you just a little bit of that like special look, but without having to take all the time to do the teeny tiny pebbles. We'll talk about eyelashing here in a second, but you can kind of see on my circles that's starting to happen a little bit, and we'll talk about why. Okay, so this is a quilt, and I'm sorry the picture's a little blurry. I don't have the best picture, but this particular quilt, I quilted these leaves so that they worked their way down an area. Like I wanted to kind of have this movement because it was going to be made into a dress. It's a long story. So that shiny thread is definitely going to draw attention. I mean, there's not much ways to hide gold thread, but again, it's a perfect example of using that direction to kind of highlight. And if you look closely, not all those leaves have pebbles in them. I'm still getting the same effect, but by cutting out a couple here and there saves me just a little bit of time. So I like to kind of work it that way. So again, this might be an example, a big area of negative space, or as a way to frame around something else. So if you had a block that you really loved and you were doing a leafy meander over the whole thing, you could maybe quilt just these around that block to show it off. And then pebbles are, again, there's something I like to use in little bits. I don't like to use a lot, and I rarely use contrasting thread, but this particular quilt was for the Cathedral quilt, the episode of Midnight Quilter, and I had a lot of fun playing with the different thread colors and quilting those pebbles as that filler. And it kind of really shows what I'm talking about. It really makes what it's quilted around pop out because of that different texture. Even though some of those are quilted with very dark thread on the lighter fabric. This is really just my persuasive argument to kind of talk you into trying out pebbles. You might think, I don't know, I don't love them, but you can use them in little bits and get a really big impact with your quilting. And here I was just playing around with thread colors and kind of blending them into each other by adding more traveling and kind of building it up. So you can take this shape and make it as basic or as wow as you want, depending on what you're working on and what your end goal is. So please think of it as a design that's fun to learn. Oh, and then here's the whole quilt. So again, those little pebbles in the spokes kind of showing off those plume feathers. And you don't have to do a lot of pebbles over a quilt to get a good impact. In fact, again, this is about as many as I like to quilt before I get really bored of it. So that's it for the pictures. Hopefully, if nothing else, I haven't scared you away from trying pebbles. Hopefully you're excited to give it a shot. Some great questions came up during the chat, so let's talk about those. Shannon said that on her quilt, the pebbles seem more defined than the other designs due to the traveling, and how to work around that. So that's the deal about pebbles. They are going to have a little bit more definition because of the traveling. Now, you can try to travel less, and there are ways to do that. You just kind of have to take your time and figure it out. The more traveling you do, the more buildup you'll have, and the more quilting will be in that area. And we know if we have more quilting in an area, it's going to draw attention. So there's that. Other ways to work around it. So in the challenge, we're using glide thread because I love glide thread. It's 40 weight. It has a little bit of sheen. But if you were doing this on an actual quilt and you didn't want the pebbles to show up, or you didn't want to be so defined, using a 50 weight thread would be a great option, or a matte thread. So Fine by Superior would be my number 2 suggestion, because it would blend in, and since it's a little thinner, it won't stand out as much. So using a different thread will definitely help as well. I don't think it necessarily looks bad when there's a little bit more definition, but if that's something that bothers you, that's something that you could try. Another question came up, was so good. A couple people, Bridget and Janice, both asked, my pebbles are oval, how do I get around that? Okay, first of all, that's not a problem, right? Because they're consistent. If they're all ovals, perfect. If they're all some shape, it's okay. So try not to worry too much about it. But there is something that can help. So I know you can't see this super well, but I have my foot right here. This is the foot of my machine. I leave my ruler foot on all the time because I like to switch in and out of my rulers. And this is a question that Karen emailed in. So also, the reason I like my ruler foot is its circle. The spacing between the needle and the front of the foot is the same as the spacing between the needle and the side of the foot. That means if I'm running my foot along a previously quilted line, it's going to be the same spacing whether I'm at the top or the side or the bottom. However, if I'm using a more dynamic foot, so hopefully you can see it a little bit, this is like a kind of a hopping foot, but you notice it's oval. So that means if I'm running this along a previously quilted line, it's going to be closer together in the front and further on the side. So that's where we kind of get in trouble sometimes with ovals. So maybe if you're using a foot that's not perfectly round, that could help. Just to give you a visual reference to kind of for your traveling and moving around. I wouldn't worry about it though. And there were quite a few people that were like, how do I get my pebbles to not be oval? It'll work itself out, or it'll just be how you quilt them. It's okay. It's still going to have that consistent texture. It's still going to look great. The only tricky thing about ovals is that now you have a direction. So sometimes it's hard to fit them into each other. So, but you'll figure it out and it'll be fine. So don't worry too much about it. Don't worry too much about it. I promise it's going to be fine. Okay, so eyelashes when quilting. So if somebody's asked me, oh, I have bad tension, what's going on? I'll ask like, oh, okay, well, is it only happening on the design? Like if it's only happening on pebbles but not others, then that's a speed issue. So what can happen is if my hands are moving too fast for the quilt, like the machine is moving a little bit slower than my hands, it's gonna be a little bit of a pull on the thread, right? So the needle's kind of up and I'm pulling just a little bit as I'm quilting, and it's gonna kind of tug that thread. So usually it's a speed issue. So the trickiest part though is finding where your happy spot is with the speed. The best thing I can say is try to adjust your machine a little faster, but try not to move your hands. Try not to move your hands faster. Our tendency is if we're quilting this way and then the machine goes faster, then our hands move faster, well, we have the same problem, right? We want to move your hands where you feel comfortable and then make your machine match your hands. If the eyelashing isn't too bad, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It'll ease in. Another thing that it could be is that if there's another question that came up, I'm using my ruler foot, somebody's using their ruler foot like I do and they're having issues with that kind of stuff. If your foot is too high, you can get that as well. So you can kind of check those two things out. Chris asked, what about transitioning from serpentine lines to serpentine flowers to swirls? Or I would say transitioning in general. Like she's like, she or he was like, how do you do that? So the hardest part about transitioning designs, especially when you're combining designs, is like mentally thinking, what am I doing now, right? So at any point, just stop and use your finger to trace out the next design you want to quilt on the fabric or in the air. Sometimes I'll sit there and like, it just kind of helps my brain wrap my mind around where I'm going, right? What am I doing next? And so that really helps you transition. Pause, kind of envision where you're going to go, and then continue. You don't have to quilt without stopping. I've done it. I've practiced a little bit before I started this challenge, and sometimes I do stop and edit it out, but you don't have to just keep going and hope you can stop, think through, mark out the next piece, or use your finger to trace it out, or take a breath and then continue on. So that will definitely help you, and that's the case for transitioning between any designs. I will say, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Just like now, when we write our name, we can transition from one letter to the next without even thinking about it. It's very much the same. Rose said she loves the challenge, doing great. The only design that's giving her trouble is the wood grain. And I didn't have a chance to like deep dive into what specific part of wood grain was giving her a hard time, but I will say this, with any design, just like I already said, I'll just preach it till the end, you have to keep going. And wood grain is hard because you quilt a couple lines, it's like spread out, it's real thin, you're like, I don't know, there's no way it's gonna look good. You have to keep going and keep filling it in. As long as everything is filled in, it's gonna look great. And I know that some of you that are watching and chatting could probably comment on this as well, because I've seen a lot of people say, I didn't think it was turning out good, and then it was done and it looked good. So if that's you, you definitely leave a comment and encourage Rose and let her know that you just got to keep going and filling it in. As long as everything's filled in, it's going to be fine. I know that's not super helpful, Rose, because you're like, oh, I know you wanted probably that secret tip, but ultimately it's just to keep going and it's going to look good. And the last question I have is Margita. She said, is it different quilting on a long arm or a sewing machine? Will I have to learn all over again if I switch? So the question was, you know, I learned on a long arm and then transitioned to a sewing machine. It's like driving a different car, right? So once you know the design, I always say 80% of quilting is just knowing where you're going. So if you know how to quilt a swirl and you quilt on a sewing machine and you go to a long arm, sure, there's going to be a little bit of a transition period where you're getting used to the freedom of movement, and that feels like a lot of like you're sliding all over the place, but you'll get comfortable with it. You already know where you're going, you just got to figure out how to drive the car, right? So you won't have to relearn everything. I will say in general, in my opinion, I think it would be easier to go from a sewing machine to a long arm than vice versa, just because of the reverse of movements, but there's no like data to back that up. That's just my opinion. But you can definitely do it. And I switch back and forth between them. And when I started alternating a little bit more, I'd have to stop and take a second and kind of warm up, and now I can just do it without thinking about it. But it's like being bilingual in quilting machines. You can definitely do it. It's just a different tool, and so you just have to kind of get used to the differences of it. So I promise, you won't have to relearn everything. It just takes a little bit to kind of get going. All right, Deborah said, yep, keep up with the wood grain. It looks great after finishing. And I know it's hard to get to that point and to like trust like that it is. We just keep going, you keep going. Kira says, not sure why, but I always try to make the pebbles really small. I have to remember bigger circles are okay. Yeah, I think everybody has their natural tendency for size, so there's that. You might just be a smaller, like I like quilting tight too, but it's also easier to quilt a smaller circle. I mean, if you think about it, if I'm quilting a larger circle, I have to sustain that movement over a bigger bit. So there's nothing wrong with quilting them small, but it will just take forever. And I will say, in classes, when I would teach, 75% of people, I would say you're doing a great job. You're not going to want to quilt that over a whole quilt, though. It's so tiny. So don't stress out about size when you're practicing. Learn the design, and then once you get comfortable, then you can think, okay, now I want to quilt them bigger or smaller or whatever. Don't make yourself learn so many different things at one time. So, Kira, you're doing great. Keep it up. Jane says, I have a problem with drawing it out. The motion is not the same as on the machine. Absolutely, it's not the same at all. But you're not drawing it for the motion. You're drawing it to learn how it goes together, right? The path of the design. So that's why I can draw on a dry erase board or a piece of paper, or it could be big or small. It's just so I can learn, like, okay, if I'm doing a swirl, here's where I go. Now where would I go then? Okay, I'm going to go out here, and then I'm going to add my next one. So people say all the time, well, my drawing's not very good, or my handwriting's not good. It doesn't matter. It's just learning how the design flows. Back in the day, when I started quilting, before the apps and all that kind of thing, I had a Magnadoodle. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but like, it's magnet, you would draw and then just erase it, and draw and erase it. And so that's how I practiced. I'd fill that thing with swirls over and over again. So trust me, even if you're having trouble getting your mind over like, okay, this is not going to help, I promise it's going to help. I promise it will help, because it helps you learn where to go next. So, you know, like business meetings or you know, family get-togethers, things like that. Anytime you can't be at your machine. All right, so I think that's about all the questions I'm going to pull out right now. Okay, when I tried Pebbles, I had problems with the tension on the back of the quilt. Any ideas how to fix this? I've tried everything I can think of. What I would be interested to see is if you were to do a Loopy Meander, try a Loopy Meander and say like, okay, is the tension bad everywhere or just in my loops? If it's just in your loops, it's a movement issue, and it's just something that's going to work itself out as you get comfortable and moving smoothly through that shape. Unfortunately, it's different for everybody, so I can't give you like a specific answer to yours, but usually it's just the movement of the machine. So usually that means you need to either speed up the machine a bit or slow it down to find that happy spot with your hands. So sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's pretty much the bit there. Now next week, we're going to be working on the Elongated Swirl, which is my favorite design ever. I know I say that all the time, but I think you're really going to like it because it's one of those designs that look very elegant and it looks very difficult, but it's really the same shape over and over and over again. So I'll show you how to quilt it as an all over, and then we'll see how to put it in a swirl chain. So it's going to be a great time. If you have any questions about this video, please leave them in the comments. I get on from time to time and answer questions. Plus, I know that my other free motion challenge quilt along quilters are going to be glad to help and answer your questions as well. That's what's so fun about them. And if you've liked the chats or any of the tutorials, I hope you'll give the video a thumbs up. That helps other quilters find it and kind of helps get the word out there. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next Wednesday with the next tutorial and the next Thursday for our next live chat. So until then, happiest quilting.